All right, so we are going to continue in section R4, and we want to try factoring trinomials. Okay, so again, remember that the first thing you want to do every time you factor is see if you can factor out something common. You may not be able to, okay, but that's going to make your life easier if you can factor out something common. So the first thing we're going to do is start off with a lead coefficient of 1. So we have a lead coefficient of 1. So for instance, if I've got an x squared plus a 6x plus 5. Okay, so we're going to talk about this one for just a second. First of all, this is a trinomial. So I've got 1 term, 2 terms, 3 terms. So tri means 3. So 1, 2, 3 terms. The next thing I notice is that it's in descending order. So when we talk about descending order, we're talking about the exponents on the variables. So in this case, my variables are x's. This has an exponent of 2. This has an exponent of 1 that I'm too lazy to write because anything to the first power is itself. Okay, so like 5 to the first is 5. Okay, so x to the first is first, or is x. And then I have x to the 0. Anything to the 0 power is 1 until you get to calculus 2. And then it gets more fun. So for our intents and purposes, anything to the 0 power will be defined to equal 1. So notice what happens with my exponents. They go 2, 1, 0. So I'm in descending order. So I'm going to write this thing again. And then what else did I say? I said, well, we've got a lead coefficient. A coefficient is the big number in front of the variable. It tells you how many of them you have. I have 1 x squared. I have 6 x's, and I have 5 x to the zeros. Okay, so it tells you how many. So I've got 1 x squared. Well, there's just a single x squared sitting here, so it's kind of a waste of my time to write the 1. And so math people are lazy. I'm going to say that over and over and over again. So if we're lazy, I'm just not going to write the 1. So how do I factor a trinomial with a lead coefficient of 1? And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pay attention to these two over here. And I'm going to start by doing 2 sets of parentheses, and the square root of the first will go in the first spots. Okay, now I need to know what goes over here. So I'm going to look at the last number. I need factors of 5. I need numbers that multiply to 5. But when I add them together, I need to get an answer of 6. Okay, so I started you off kind of easy. What are factors that multiply to 5? Well, my answers are 1 and 5. Okay, I could go into decimals and fractions and all that. I'm not doing that because there's an infinite number of possibilities if I do that. So right now, the numbers that can multiply to 5 are 1 times 5. Well, they also need to add up to 6. So 1 plus 5 is 6. So I found my magic numbers. One of them is a positive 1 and one of them is a positive 5. Okay, so you just successfully factored this down. You told me what was multiplied together to get this answer. Okay, this is the answer to a multiplication problem. And you told me what was multiplied together to get it. So let's go a little bit harder. What happens if I've got x squared minus 8x and then plus, I'm making this up on the fly, 12. Okay, so first thing I notice, it's in descending order. Second thing I notice, there's nothing common among all 3 terms. These two have x's, but he doesn't. These two have numbers, but he doesn't, other than 1. Okay, so there's nothing common that I can pull out. So now I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to try and factor this thing. So if it's factorable, I'm going to factor it. So I need 2 numbers that multiply to 12, but when I add them together, I get a negative 8. Okay, so there's a little secret message in here. If they're multiplying to a positive 12, you know that their signs have to be the same. Because a positive times a positive is positive, and a negative times a negative is positive. So I know my factors are both going to have to be negative because I'm trying to add up to a negative. So what are my options? To multiply to 12, I can use 1 and 12. Or negative 1, negative 12. I can use negative 2 and negative 6 and negative 3 and negative 4. So I want them to add up to a negative 8. Negative 1 and negative 12 is negative 13. Did not work. Negative 2 and negative 6, that's negative 8. Those are my magic numbers. So I'm going to put a -2 here and a -8 there. It doesn't matter which one you put them into. Okay? So remember that this is this chunk times this chunk. So come back over here for a second, separate problem. If I ask you what is 3 times 7 or what is 7 times 3, what's your answer? It's 21. So x minus 2 times x minus 8 is the same thing as x minus 8 times x minus 2. Okay? Different problem, ignore that. All right, so I factored him. Now, let's try another one where we get even more exciting. So I've got to think for just a second. Let's do a -21, and let's do a -4x. Okay, so first thing I do every time I factor, make sure it's in descending order. Second thing, is there anything common? These two have x's, he doesn't. These two have numbers, he doesn't, other than 1. Okay, so I know that if it's factorable, I'm going to drop that down to x and x. Okay, square root of the first goes in the first spot. But now I need two numbers that multiply to -21. Okay, so that opens up a whole nother kettle of fish. Okay, whatever. If I'm going to multiply to a negative number, that means one number must be negative and one number must be positive. And so what I'm looking for in this case is when I subtract, I'm going to get this number. So up here, it's when I added them together. Up here, it's when I added them together. But since I'm asking for a negative number, it's going to be actually the difference between the two. So my numbers for 21 are 1 and 21 or 3 and 7. So I notice that if my numbers have different signs, so in other words, 1 and 21 isn't going to add up to 22 because one of those two numbers has to be negative. Your bigger number will take the sign of your middle term. Okay, so my options at this point are a -21 and a +1, or a -7 and a +3. Okay, so your bigger number will take the sign of the bigger term, or the middle term. So what does that mean? I've got two options. Well, -21 plus 1 is -20. That's not it. I'm looking for a -4. -7 plus 3 is -4. So that's my magic numbers. So I'm going to put a +3 and a -7. Okay, so now we know how to factor those. So what we're going to do at this point is, remember, this is factoring trinomials with a lead coefficient of 1. So my coefficient the whole way down has been 1. Now what we're going to introduce is a lead coefficient that is not 1. Okay, so it gets a little bit more exciting. So we're still factoring trinomials. So I've got 6r squared minus 23r plus 10. Okay, so the first thing I notice is I got a lead coefficient, and that makes my life miserable. We're going to have a trick to fix that. Okay, so it'll put us back in familiar territory, and then we'll suck it all back out, and it'll fix itself. First thing I want to do every time I factor is make sure it's in descending order. So I've got R2, R1, R0. Second thing I want to do is make sure there's nothing common. So I can pull a 2 out of this, I can pull a 2 out of this, but not out of this. Okay, so no matter what I try, there's not a common factor among all three of those. So now I say, okay, is there a special case? Well, this is a trinomial. So what we're going to do is called slide, divide, slide. Okay, and when I do slide, divide, slide, what that's going to do is it's going to put me back in the scenario that I was in a while ago, but then I can fix it. So what I'm going to do is get rid of the thing I don't like. I don't like this 6 out front. So I'm going to slide it to the end, and I'm going to multiply. So multiply your first and last is what I'm trying to say. So I've got an r squared minus 23r plus 60. Now I have changed the problem, and I'm just doing something to make my life easier because I'm a lazy math person. Okay, recognize that you've changed the problem. This thing is not the same as this thing. So we're going to have to fix it in a second. But just take the 6 times the last number and I get 60. So now I'm in familiar territory because I know how to factor this. So two numbers that multiply to 60, positive 60, so your signs are the same, but add up to -23, so your signs must be negative, are going to be a -2 and a and a Negative 3 and negative 20. All right, negative 3 and negative 20. So a negative 3 times a negative 20 is positive 60. But negative 3 plus negative 20 is negative 23. Okay, so I found my two numbers. Now, two sets of parentheses. Square root of the first goes in the first spot. And then I'm going to have a minus 3 minus 20. Okay, now here's the fun part. I have factored. So when I slid, I multiplied. Now I got to start fixing it. Well, what did I slide over? I slid over a 6. So the numbers that I just figured out, I need to divide by 6. Okay? So we're going to fix it and put it back. If you can reduce it, reduce it. So I know that 3 over 6 reduces to 1/2. So I've got r minus 1/2. 20 over 6 is going to reduce by 2's. So that's going to be 10/3. So I have r minus 10/3. Okay. So I slid to get my 60. Now I just divided. So I divided and got these answers. Well, now I want to slide those denominators back up front. So this 2 in this set of parentheses is going to slide back in front of the r. So that gives me a 2r minus 1. This 3 is going to slide back in front of that set of parentheses. So I'm going to get a 3r minus 10. And that is slide, divide, slide. Okay, so let's try it again. Let's get a little bit more exciting. If I have, speed it up just a little bit. So I've got a 2n squared plus a 9n plus 10. So my instructions are please factor. So I notice that first of all it's in descending order. So n2, n1, no n. I notice that there's not any value that I can factor out of all three terms. I've got to be able to pull it out of all three terms. I can pull out 2's, but only from these two, not from him. Okay, so I'm kind of sort of stuck. So now I say, okay, can I factor this? So I do know that this is a trinomial, but my lead coefficient isn't 1, so I'm going to slide that 2 to the end. So I'm going to use slide, divide, slide. So slide the 2 to the end and multiply. So I need two factors that multiply to 20. Your signs are the same. Then when I add them together, I get positive 9. So my options are 1 and 20, 2 and 10, or 4 and 5. And there's your answer. Because 4 times 5 is 20. 4 plus 5 is 9. So two sets of parentheses. Square root of the first goes in the first spot. And I get a positive 4, positive 5. Okay, but I need to fix it. So I slid the 2 out. Now I'm going to divide it back. So I slid by 2, so divide by 2. If it reduces, reduce it. So 4 over 2 becomes 2. And 5 over 2 doesn't reduce, so slide that 2 back to the front of his set of parentheses. So 2n plus 5. So you just factored this, and you didn't have any scary guessing and checking and all that kind of mess. Okay, and so that is your answer. So let's do, ew, that's ugly. Let's do one more. Oh, it's not ugly. Okay, so I've got 18 r to the third plus 33r squared minus 30r. Okay, so notice I said, ooh, it's scary, but it's not. Do you want to know why? Because the first thing I do every time I factor is see if there's something common. So I notice I can pull out an r from everything. I also notice I can pull out a 3 from everything. So remember when I say that I'm pulling it out or factoring it out, I'm actually dividing. So if I divide out a 3r from everything, what is 18r to the third divided by 3r? What's 18 divided by 3? It's 6. I got 3 r's, but I take 1 out. So that leaves me with a 6r squared. Okay. What is 33r squared divided by 3r? That's going to be 11r. And what is negative 30r divided by 3r? That's going to be a negative 10. Okay. So we have successfully factored out something common. You have factored. Now we just got to see if we can go further. So this 3r is prime. He's going to come along for the ride. I need to see if I can break this one down. Okay, so my answer I'm going to put down here. Do not forget your 3r. It's part of your answer. But now I'm going to use slide, divide, slide on this one. So I've got a 6r squared plus 11r minus 10. So I'm going to slide that 6 to the end. So I have an r squared plus 11r minus 60. So I need two factors that multiply to 60. So your signs are different because it's negative 60. Then when I subtract, I'll get 11. So my options for 60 are going to be 1 and 60, 2 and 30, 3 and 20, 4 and 15, 5 and 12, 6 and 10, 7, 8, 9, we're done. Okay, so these are my options. The bigger number on the right is going to have a positive sign, which means this one's negative. So when I follow these signs, which one is going to give me 11? And so I notice that 15 minus 4 gives me 11. Or negative 4 plus 15 gives me 11. So I know that these are my two numbers. So I'm going to start squishing this together. So I've got an r minus 4 and an r plus 15. But remember that we needed to slide it back. So I slid the 6 to the end. Now I need to divide by 6. Both of these are reducible. So 4 over 6 is going to become 2/3. And 15 over 6 reduces by 3, so I'm going to get 5 halves. And now I'm going to slide that 3 forward. So this is a 3r minus 2. I'm going to slide this 2 forward, so I get a 2r plus 5. And now I have successfully factored something with a lead coefficient. So we're going to come back with one more shorter video, and that's going to be factoring by grouping.